Hello, and welcome to Chapter 6, which is the Americas. So, we've talked a lot about stuff in the Old World that was going on, but let's talk a little bit about the New World. So, we got North and South America, Central America connecting it, and some of the first peoples who came about in the New World were corn farming people rather than like the grain farming of the Old World. And they came up a lot in what is now Mexico, Central America, places like that. So, the first big ones were the Olmecs. They were fairly advanced. They had a huge city called Teotihuacan after the Olmecs. The Olmecs weren't necessarily gone, but then precedence goes to the Zapotecs. Then from the Zapotecs, it goes to the Mayas. So you may remember it, depending on how old you were. Back in 2012, there was a whole Mayan, they say the world's going to end in 2012 thing. And, the reason that kind of exists is the Mayans had a very advanced technology in a number of fronts. One of their big things was calendar making. And, they had like large palace cities and like temple cities in the jungle. And their civilization survived for a couple hundred years, but then they kind of disappeared. And we're not entirely sure what happened, it could be warfare or something like that. So that's the thing about early history is when things happen that aren't recorded, then we kind of have to like guess at what happened. Kind of like anybody in the audience know? Yes, Mohenjo-Daro and the Harappans. That's one group that happened to. And then later, like even Croatan in Virginia, or not Croatan, the Roanoke colony, which disappeared, they write Croatan in the tree, or the post or whatever. So sometimes when stuff isn't written and no record is kept, then you kind of have to guess at it. So history becomes a lot more like science, like hypotheses and stuff like that. So after the end of the Maya, the mysterious end of the Maya, then you go to the Aztecs. And a little bit, just a tad bit more on the Maya is they're like this network of cities which sometimes fight each other and stuff like that. But then with the Aztecs, it is very centralized. And so the Aztecs are able to take over much of what is now Mexico and part of what is other Central American countries now, and from their capital, Tenochtitlan. And so one of the things that all of these countries were doing, these groups, is that they had these things called chinampas, where they're draining areas to allow more arable farmland, because parts of Mexico are very mountainous, or they're also, there's an incentive to create more farmland, so then you can support more people. So once they crack that, they have very large cities, especially the Aztecs and the Maya. Very large cities, more complicated systems going. So while all that's happening in Central America, there are groups, we'll draw our little Great Lakes and everything real quick. There are groups in what is now North America. You have people like the Cahokians, and a lot of people who are building like mounds for burial and stuff like that. So if you go out into the Midwest today, you can see some of their remnants. Unfortunately, a lot of them, when the Spaniards came to the first colonies in, say, Florida, San Augustine, or in Mexico, disease spread and killed off most of those Native Americans before Europeans were really able to make enough contact with them to really understand them. So a lot of their history has been lost, and most of them were dead by the time, say, Americans got to those areas. But yeah, so you have like the Cahokians, the Mississippians, just people like that. And there's one city, I think Cahokia, had over 100,000 people in it. Then you go down to the south, and there are mountains along here. We've talked about them before, the Andes Mountains. And to the west of the Andes Mountains, protected, is the Incans. And they are one group that takes over the other groups west of the Andes, and they have a very complicated civilization with an emperor, and they have this really interesting system of keeping records where they tie knots in strings to like mean numbers and stuff like that. So they're a very interesting group. Yeah. And they have like a very complicated social welfare system wherein you work when you're a young adult, and then the government will take care of you when you're elderly. So it was like a very tight-knit civilization. Instead of like eradicating conquered peoples, they integrated them right into Incan culture and stuff like that. So Incan Empire, very advanced, and yeah. And their palace city, one of the palace cities for their emperors or for religious purposes was Machu Picchu. which is now a touristy thing. And then you have the peoples living along the Amazon River in what is now Brazil and part of Peru and like the Venezuela and Suriname, all that. So you have some people living in the jungle, and lots of very different civilizations, different languages. A great number of the world's languages right now, like the diversity of language contained within Amazonia, is insane because so many different groups could live, and there wasn't as much as an impetus to conquer or stuff like that. They were very contained. Yeah, so that is the New World, and let's see. I believe that brings us to the end. Oh, and one other little thing to throw in to remember is there are differing systems of writing. They don't, or at least in Central America, Mesoamerica, they don't have a syllable language. You know what I mean? Like, say A means like ah. They have a hieroglyphic glyph type language, which has made deciphering some of their texts kind of difficult, but we have figured out some of what the Mayans were saying and the Aztecs as well. So that is it, and we'll see you next time.